And welcome back, rugby fans, to Rugby411. As always, I'm your host. My name is Joshua Shibata, and this is the MLR Power Rankings for week number 17, the penultimate week of the MLR 2022 season. Uh, Still an exciting week of Major League Rugby action. The playoff picture has been starting to solidify. All six spots in the playoffs, three in the Eastern Conference, three in the Western Conference, have been secured by teams. It's just the order that the teams will be at the end of the season has yet to be determined. That means week number 18, the final week of the season. There's still a lot to play for. But there's been some interesting results in week number 17. So much so that for, I believe, the fifth week in a row, we have a new number one team in the Power Rankings. Now, if you are new to the Power Rankings, you haven't seen this at all for the entire 2022 season. The way that the Power Rankings work, it is not determined by the win-loss records or where these teams are sitting in the standings. It is determined purely on what happens on the pitch. How much a team defeats another team, the strength of their opponent, if the opponent is somebody at the top or if somebody is at the bottom, that obviously determines how much that winning team will move up in the rankings. Also, if it's a home or away win, as we know in Major League Rugby, home field advantage is a real thing. So a lot of things factor into these power rankings, which I'll admit to you guys, this week was, with a lot of the interesting results that occurred this week, it made it very, very tough to determine a power ranking. But after kind of looking it over for a bit, I'm pretty happy with how the teams turned out. So there are your usual suspects at the bottom. But the teams that are at the top, it's interesting. I think it leads up to some interesting debate. So without further ado, let's get to it. As I mentioned before, there are some usual suspects at the bottom. Your number 13 team is still the number 13 team. They did have a bye, so they really weren't going anywhere. Unfortunately, I feel they will be ending the season without a win under their belt. The new kids on the block, the Dallas Jackals, are your number 13 ranked team. Now, sitting at number 12, after a very, very, somewhat pretty embarrassing loss to, granted, the number one team in the league, or arguably the number one team in the league, the New England Free Jacks. But, NOLA just did not look good at all. They lost 57-5, and really, that last try was literally at the last minute. Lots of turnovers, lots of really bad play, and NOLA just got trumped by New England. Granted, again, New England is one of the best teams. With that win, I'll go more into it with New England when I get to them. But with that win, New England did secure the number one overall position in the playoffs, meaning that if New England makes it to the championship game, the MLR championship game will be hosted in New England at Veterans Stadium, because in Major League Rugby we do not have neutral territory yet for the MLR championship game. But NOLA did not look good at all, so they stay at number 12. Now, number 11, as much as I want to move them up, a loss is still a loss, and especially with the way the other teams played, I really couldn't justify moving them up. But man, what a game. Old Glory DC, even though they did not have that great of a season, they are just playing with reckless abandonment. Last week with Houston, they broke an MLR record, the most points scored in the game. I believe it was 108. They did it again this week now, breaking that record, this time playing against Rugby New York. A total combined of 111 points in this game, 49-59. So they just beat the old record last week by 2 points. But they also had the most tries ever scored by two teams in a Major League Rugby game. 16 total tries. Yes, you heard that right. 16 tries were scored in this game. If you like offensive, almost like Rugby 7 style rugby, but with a full 15 people on each side, this was the game for you. It, it was a fun game. Some highlights or people to shout out to Willie Tatiana and Rohan Sofuloy from Old Glory DC. Willie had 2 tries, while Rohan Sofuloy has actually, honestly has been in my opinion, for Old Glory, the MVP of the team. He, ever since he became the fly half for the team, he has been really, really great. Not only on the tee, but just directing traffic as well. He had a great day today. Not only did he score a try of his own, but he also was perfect off of the tee, 6 for 6, 17 total points. Again, it wasn't enough to upend Rooney, but considering Rooney is fighting for a playoff spot, they secured it with that win. They're still trying to determine if they'll get the number 2 or the number 3 spot, which I'm making a video about all the playoff scenarios, so I'll go more into depth about that. But Rooney still has a lot to play for, and they can't rest just yet. But Old Glory really has nothing to play for. So like I said, they've been playing the last couple of weeks with literally reckless abandonment. They just want to play. They just want to have fun, and it really, really does show in the last couple of games. So Old Glory, as much as I want to move them up, a loss is still a loss, even though, again, they did put up 49 points against one of the best teams in the league, Rugby New York. That does say a lot. But it is a loss, so Old Glory stays at number 11. Now, another team that lost, the second highest slide in the rankings, was San Diego Legion, sliding all the way down from number 4 to number 10. They took a beating from the Austin Gilgronis, 28-44. Honestly, I kind of was feeling San Diego might have the edge in this game. They were on a 2-game win streak. Austin was on a very weird 2-game losing streak. But Austin just... It almost felt like they remembered what kind of team they were from the very beginning of the season. Austin was, at one point, the best team in the league, and then started having this weird little slide in the middle of the season. San Diego kind of was inconsistent, but started really making some headway near the end. And it just came to a head where San Diego, just in this game, looked really, really lackluster, tired, and Austin just took advantage of it. Now, granted, San Diego had to travel over to Austin. Sometimes the travel can be tough. Austin is definitely a hot, humid place to play. Not so much so in San Diego. So a lot of those factors, again, guys, as I mentioned before, home field advantage is a real thing. That kind of all might have factored into the loss, but it was a pretty bad loss to Austin. So made me, and especially with the way that everything else worked out with all the other teams, I had no choice but to slide the Legion all the way from number 4 down to number 10. That is the last game of the season for San Diego, and unfortunately, with the results of the other teams, San Diego is out of the playoffs. So that is the end of their 2022 campaign. Moving on, dropping down 2 spots from number 7 to number 9 are the Toronto Arrows, who had a loss to Rugby ATL, 23-34. They started off really well. Atlanta had scored 23 unanswered points. I kind of felt maybe Toronto had the ability to put the game away, but for whatever reason, they started falling apart near the end, kind of ran out of gas, allowed Atlanta to score 2 tries before the half, and then in the second half, Toronto never scored again, unfortunately. So again, they had 23 points in the very first half and no points in the second half. ATL ran away with the game in the second half. That loss for Toronto also ends their playoff hopes, and so Toronto is over for their... technically, they have a game next week, but their playoff hopes are over now with that loss to Rugby ATL, and with that win for Rugby ATL, they are now in the playoffs and secured a playoff spot. Now, which playoff spot, number 2 or number 3 in the Eastern Conference, that will be determined in week number 18. The biggest drop of this week, unfortunately, was the Houston SaberCats, dropping all the way from number 1 down to number 8 with a a very, very weird game against the Seattle Seawolves. Now, granted, again, they were playing in Seattle. Starfire Stadium is one of the loudest, if not the loudest stadium in Major League Rugby. They very much take the name of the 16th man to heart, and Seattle really looked amazing. The seawall was in effect, and Houston looked really, really lackluster. But then literally at the 70-minute mark, Houston started playing, Seattle stopped playing. And in the end, this was a very, very important game where Seattle, not only did they need to have the win to keep their playoff hopes alive, but they also had to win to keep San Diego's playoff hopes alive. The SaberCats only needed 2 points. So if they didn't win, they still had the chance to get 2 bonus points if you're not familiar with rugby. 1 bonus point in Major League Rugby for scoring 4 tries, and then a second bonus point for coming within 7 points of their opponent who beat them. And in literally the 70th minute of the game, Houston SaberCats scored 2 tries, which not only gave them the 4 tries, but put them within, I believe they put them within 10 points. And then Robbie Poovey from the Houston SaberCats, last second penalty kick, gave them 3 points, and not only secured them the second bonus point, but secured them a playoff spot, even though they lost. It is crazy, but the Houston SaberCats, with that loss, but because they secured 2 bonus points, were able to get into the playoffs, securing the number 3 spot in the Western Conference. They are, just like with New England in the East, they are the only team that has secured a playoff spot, secured the number 3 spot. Nothing that happens next week can affect that. There's no way that they can jump to number 2. There's definitely no way they can jump to number 1, regardless if the 2 teams above them, which we'll get to in just a moment, lose. The SaberCats can't move from that number 3 spot, but they did secure themselves a playoff spot. Unfortunately, with that loss for Seattle, even though Seattle's going to move up in the rankings, they're out of the playoffs, and as I mentioned before, San Diego is out of the playoffs as well. So congratulations to Houston for making a playoff spot despite losing, which is very interesting, and it really can only happen pretty much in rugby. The number 7 spot, moving up 1 spot, Rugby New York, the second half of the team that just broke a Major League record. Like I said, total combined 59 to 49, 108 points scored, 8 tries scored. Crazy, crazy game. Ed Fido scored 3 tries. He had a monster of a game. As they say, feed the beast when it comes to Ed Fido, and that is exactly what happened with him. 3 tries scored by him. Also, Waisake Naholo, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that name correctly, scored his first 2 tries as a Rugby New York member. Jack Hyten actually was out of the game, so that allowed Sam Windsor, I still believe he has the most points scored ever by any player in Major League Rugby history. He was able to come back to the fly half position. He's been struggling all year this year, unfortunately, even moving from Houston to Rugby New York. But he was good. Lights out in this game. He went 6 for 7, scored 12 points off the boot. A major factor into New York winning this game. Again, as much as they scored so many points, they did let Old Glory DC score 49 points. Old Glory is one of the lower teams, so I couldn't really give New York too much of a push up, so I just moved them 1 spot from number 8 to number 7. Moving up 4 spots, the Seattle Seawolves from number 10 to number 6, an impressive win over the Houston SaberCats. Again, unfortunately, they had the game pretty much locked away, and then for whatever reason, just let Houston come back in it. Even though Seattle won the game, they allowed Houston, as I mentioned before, to secure 2 bonus points, and that was enough to knock out Seattle from the playoffs. So unfortunately, again, Seattle's playoffs hopes are done in the season. Your only 2-time MLR champions are not going to make the playoffs in 2022. Moving down a spot from number 4 to number 5, the Utah Warriors, who suffered a pretty close loss to Los Angeles, 39-32. It was a very brutal, very chippy game, as you expect from two very physical teams, or especially a very physical team like Utah. Unfortunately, Utah had a lot of penalties, 2 yellow cards, and at the very last moment, a red card as well. But the 2 yellow cards, it was interesting, despite the fact that there was a moment where Utah was 2 men down. They were still able to score a try against LA, and they only allowed LA to score 1 try. There was another moment where Utah had 3 yellow cards. Utah was down another man, but they didn't allow LA to score at all. So, if Utah didn't have those penalties at the end, and the red card was literally at the very end of the game, so that didn't play a factor at all in the game. But if Utah didn't have those 3 yellow cards, game could have been completely different. Not to take anything away from LA, but Utah has really started to play like the Utah Warrior team of 2021, like the Utah Warrior team that I've been saying in these videos that they should have been this year. Don't know what exactly happened. Don't know why it is that they're now starting to surge, but unfortunately, of course, they are completely out of the playoff picture. But they did pull a very good game against LA, so only dropped them 1 spot from number 4 to number 5. New England, your number 1, they just secured the number 1 overall spot in Major League Rugby, moved up from 6 to number 4 with a dominating performance over they won 57-5, a dominating performance over New Orleans. Now, granted, again, it is New Orleans. They are second to last in the rankings, but 57-5. I mean, it wasn't even close. Mitch Wilson had 3 tries. LaRue Milan had 2 tries. Bodine Walker, again, has been Bodine Walker. Honestly, on the short list of Player of the Year, he had a 13 points, 6 for 7 off the try. He is now second still in the total points scored this season with 131. Joe Peterson of San Diego is sitting at 146 at the top. As I mentioned before, Joe Peterson of the San Diego Legion, they are done for the season. They played 1 extra game than everybody else, so they end the season on a bye. Bodine Walker has a chance. I mean, he's only down 15 points. He has the ability to possibly go over past Joe Peterson to be the top point scorer of the 2022 season. It will be interesting to see if they let Bodine Walker play. Again, in my playoff scenario video, I'll kind of go over that a little bit more. But because New England, with their win, has secured the number 1 spot overall, it'll be interesting to see if they care to play. I mean, granted, the next game that they have, the last game of the season, is against Rugby New York, a team that's going to be in the playoffs, a team that they might possibly see in the Eastern Championship game. Don't know if New England will field their starters or just let everyone kind of rest up and get ready. They do have a bye because they are in the number 1 spot. The way the playoffs work this year for Major League Rugby is the number 1 spot team in the West and the East get a bye. The number 2 and the number 3 teams will play off against each other. So right now that is Rugby New York and Rugby ATL, and New England will face the winner. So, again, it's going to be interesting to see what New England does with the game. Win or loss really doesn't affect them at all. New York has to win that game. But there's a possibility they may not let Bodine Walker play. So, Bodine Walker may not break Joe Peterson as the top point scorer of the season, but maybe. We'll see. Things like that do kind of play a big factor in the ego and the mentality of rugby players. But we'll see. Bodine Walker is a very important part of the team. If he were to happen to get hurt in a game that really made no difference, that would kind of be a very regretful decision. So, again, going more into detail on that in the playoff picture video, but right now, moving up 2 spots, your number one spot secured team in Major League Rugby, New England at number 4. Moving up 2 spots, the before mentioned Rugby ATL moving up from number 5 to number 3. Again, a good win over the Toronto Arrows, 34-23. They were kind of stumbling at the very beginning of the game. It was really weird. They were down as we were heading into the half, 23-7. Fortunately, right before the half ended, ATL scored 2 tries, and then they never let Toronto score another point in the second half of the game, securing their win 34-23. But it was just kind of weird that ATL had a very, very slow start in the game. But again, comparatively to everybody else, was enough to move them up 2 spots to the number 3 spot. Like I mentioned before, they're going to be playing a very, very important game. ATL and New York are fighting over the number 2 and the number 3 spot. So ATL will be going against New Orleans, if I remember correctly. And even though New Orleans did get spanked against New England, yeah, New Orleans could play spoiler, especially if Rugby ATL has a slow start again. But we'll see. That next game is going to be super, super important for ATL as they are battling for that home field advantage in the number 2 spot in the Eastern Conference. The biggest jumper was Austin Gilgronis from number 9 all the way to number 2. Big, big win for them. They won against San Diego 44-28. Again, Austin was down to number 9 because they were on a very bad 2-game losing streak. And that win over San Diego was very, very impressive in my opinion. 44-28. It was nice to see the return of Mac Mason for Austin. He was perfect off the sea, 6 for 6, scored 14 points for Austin. Austin looked like the Gilgronis of the beginning of the season, where they were at one point the best team in the league. And that's not good for the other 2 teams that are in the Western Conference playoff picture. Again, it's going to be very interesting to see how Austin and Houston play against each other, because they have the game next week number 18 against each other, where, again, I'll go into the playoff video, but it's going to be interesting to see how these 2 teams approach it, with the possibility that they'll be playing against each other again in the very first round of the Western Conference playoffs. So right now, Austin's looking really, really good. That loss with Seattle was kind of interesting for Houston, but Austin has a lot of momentum going into the playoffs. And of course, number 1, your reigning and defending MLR champions, the LA Guiltinis, moving up from number 2 to number 1. They had to, because they did beat they did win, and the number 1 team did lose. LA went over to Zion Stadium to beat a very tough Utah team, 39-32. It was very nice to see Jack Carty, the fly half for LA, technically the backup fly half, because their starting fly half, Matt Gitto, who we're praying will be able to come back in time for the playoffs. But if not, Carty looked really, really good in his first start of the season. He missed pretty much the entire season because of a torn pec during preseason. Scored 14 points, 6 for 7 off of the tee. Looked really, really good. But again, he looked really good coming into their game against Dallas as a backup. But LA wasn't a perfect game. Again, it was a very tough game against Utah. LA did get some advantages when Utah had some disciplinary problems. They had 3 yellow cards and a red card. But LA was not able to really capitalize on those yellow cards. But Utah is a very, very tough team. Also, too, LA had a lot of line-out issues, which was really, really tough if you're an LA fan like myself to watch. LA really needs to clean up on their line-outs, which was an area of strength for them when they won the championship. If they can't clean those up, it's going to be very, very hard to see them repeat as 2-time back-to-back MLR champions. But that is the power rankings for Week 17. Like I mentioned before, it was tough to figure out exactly where everybody should fall. Houston losing and Seattle coming up. But then again, also, too, with how New England won, again, granted, against Old Glory, and how Austin really looked impressive against San Diego. it was really, really tough to figure out where everybody fell into the power rankings. But, and again, I don't really base anything off standings, but if you look at the way that the picture is, you do have your top teams in the West and the Eastern Conference. Granted, Seattle and Utah have played spoilers, so they're kind of moved up. But you have Rugby New York, and you have Houston, and then pretty much the teams that haven't been good all year have pretty much stayed here at the bottom. San Diego is kind of the outlier, but they've been struggling all year. But again, looking at the picture, I'm really happy with the results. So, as always, let me know what you think in the comments below. If you agree with my results, if you agree with my rankings, if your team made it, or if your team's at the bottom, let me know. And again, it's going to be really, really exciting and interesting to see how this picture plays off in the final week of the season. There's still a lot to play for. And who knows? There is a possibility. I mean, LA is going against Seattle, and Seattle has been kind of building some momentum at the very end of the season. There's a possibility we might have a new number 1 team for a 6th week in a row going into week number 18. But we'll find out next week when I reveal those power rankings. So again, thank you very much for watching my video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the pitch.